Hello, everyone. We're going live today with Paladine, who is a medicine man and an energetic healer and a really dear friend of mine. So we'll wait for him and Alfina to hop on and then we'll get started.
Hello. Amazing.
Hello.
Well, hello.
So
Beautiful.
Take
wonderful.
my volume up.
Hi.
Nice.
That was seamless.
Ben, it's only getting better.
How are you guys?
Honey, better and better. Wonderful. So I'm back in Connecticut visiting
Nice.
family, which is a different frequency than Tulum. So I'm just adjusting and acclimating, but feeling really grateful. Grateful to be here. Grateful
Likewise.
to see you. Grateful to see you.
And how are
Yeah,
you, Elfina? Nice to
Yeah.
see you again.
it's nice to see you too with all our tropical fauna in the background.
Yes.
Yeah, we're so honored to have you. And for anyone that's joining us, we're SISociety, and every week we have these different interesting taboo conversations. And
Mm,
this month we're exploring the topic of death and
mm,
how we can be more alive through discussing death is what we've already been realizing. Talking to a death doula last week was so fun,
mm.
and I'm sure our conversation will be equally as juicy with you. And this is for everyone that's
Yeah, we
I
just
can't
lost
hear your
audio.
audio.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can you just
Okay,
repeat what you
yeah.
just said? There was no
So
audio.
Paul is a medicine man, an energetic and vibrational healer, and a non-duality teacher. Personally, the medicine itself for the last decade, helping usher hundreds of others through their own ego deaths and all sorts of processes with the medicines over the last 5 years or so. And we're just honored
Mm.
to have him here today from Tulum, Mexico. And um, we encourage anyone that's watching, if you have a question for Paul too and you want to be a part of the conversation, please add anything you might have in the chat and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So grateful to have you. Elfina, thank you for the introduction. And yeah, I'd love to just dive in and start the discussion and what's coming up for me. And I guess I'm kind of surprised I'd never
Mm.
thought to ask you this before after having sat with you in medicine ceremonies. But what is death to you? Like through this journey
Good
that you've been
question.
on, how would you
Yes,
define
yeah.
that?
So the concept of death, I'll take you back to my first memory. I remember being like 6, 7 or 8 year old child and kind of learning about death, realizing the reality of death. And I remember kind of going to sleep that night in a total state of fear, just imagining and contemplating a nothingness that, we have one life, we die, and then it's just nothing. And that concept alone brought a lot of fear into me. And I remember like sobbing like a little child at the prospect of it and almost like pleading with God, like, please don't let that be it. That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound fair. So then that takes me to probably about 10 years ago, where I was called to my first medicine, which was ayahuasca. And I didn't really know much about ayahuasca. I read a little bit, I'd seen some documentaries on TV, but this concept came to me like through intuition or higher self or whatever, was like, if I can know what it is to die, maybe I can know what it is to live.
Mm.
So that was the kind of underlying concept that was drawing me into it. And then lo and behold, through the medicine itself, I went through some very deep ego deaths. And the first one was like a complete like blackout, nothing. And then finding myself reborn into a womb and then being born again, reborn. I went through many, many ego deaths that night, and each time I thought I was actually dying. And I was like, wow, like in full resistance. These were my first true understandings in this life of what it is to die. And at that time, I was resisting the whole time. And the medicine was showing me, like, just surrender, just surrender. It's better to surrender. It's better to surrender. But the fear is so much that you just resist. You white knuckle it. And yeah, throughout other journeys, after that, I came to realize that death is not what the common perception really is. There's many religions, many philosophies, different perspectives on it. And in my own, I came to understand that death, maybe in a simple way to put it, what is born must die. So if you're born, you have to die. And it's a linked experience. So for me, death is a door to rebirth.
Beautiful. It's a transition, a portal of sorts, a doorway of sorts.
Exactly. Yes.
And
When one door closes on this life, another one opens in another one.
Yeah, I heard it's so interesting. The Buddhist perspective isn't life to death; it's birth to rebirth. So I know everyone has a different perception on it. I mean, what do you think? Like, I mean, you've sat with so many people who've experienced an ego death of sorts. That really, I mean, very much when you're in the
Yes.
space feels like a real death, right? I mean, at least in context. I mean, I can't remember what my last death
Yes.
felt like in my past life. But what do you think happens to our souls after we die? Like, do we immediately shoot up into consciousness? Do we get reborn into another body? Is it a choice that we make? Is like being human some sort of punishment? Like,
Great
how do you see
question.
all of those things connecting?
In my own understanding and philosophy, I only speak from experience. So I have to go to what I've experienced through my expansions. And I've had many different versions of the ego death on different medicines. And they all are beautiful, and they provide a different window to what that is. So one that comes to mind was an experience of being completely dissolved and losing full connection with the body and just becoming consciousness. And as I became consciousness, we went through this journey of floating, is maybe a good way to put it, floating upward, starting from where my body was, and then like an elevator was like taking me up through different dimensions, I think we'll call them. And as it was happening, it was like, the resistance was there, the perspective from the mind was like, oh my God, I've died. This was the ceremony that took me out, okay? And you have to kind of come to terms with it. And as you surrender to it, it kind of becomes easier. And then you just start to become a passenger on the experience. So the first kind of pit stop we made, we floated through different, dimensions of, it was kind of like leaving the earth and then, going through space and then different layers of light. And then I found myself in what I would say is like a celestial realm or dimension. And it was a golden city. And it was beautiful. And this elevator-like experience kind of stopped and gave me like an opportunity to step out into it. And I was looking upon this golden city and I was like, oh, I guess this is home now. I better get used to it. And I was just taking it in. And then it was like, no, we're going higher. So then I started kind of floating up again. And then we went through other different layers of light. And eventually at the top of this, I became Source. And I was Source, one with it. And it was very scary because it was like, oh, I've died. Here I am about to be reborn. That was the feeling. And this fear came over of like, oh, my memory's going to be wiped. I'm not going to be Paul anymore. I'm going to start from scratch again. And there was this like resistance to that. But then I surrendered to it. And then I came back after it. So for me, I think, depending upon the evolution of your soul, your karma, is what will happen once you die. For me, I've never seen anything past that of like, being put before a being like God or other celestial beings who have like, oh, we're going to recite your life to you, and this is what you did wrong, and this is what you did right. So for me, in my belief, I think for most people, there will be an incredible experience that occurs through death. Actually, a beautiful one, probably more magical than any medicine can actually give you that window to. I think it's even more beautiful. And it's obviously something we fear very much. But once we, even on the basic mind level, we can understand that we all have to die. No one can cheat it. So when it does come, it makes sense to be aware or ready to know how to surrender to it. And I do think it will make a difference to that experience if you come and with that intention of surrendering. It's going to make a big difference to it. So I think back to your main question of, I think as soon as we die, we go through an experience, and that'll be different for everyone, as unique as their soul and their version of consciousness, and then they will be reborn. I don't personally prescribe to, we choose our path, we choose, the experience that we're going to have and come back to have. I think karma dictates that, and kind of like an AI or a supercomputer, it just kind of permeates and calculates everything. And then it's like, all right, this is next. Boom.
Wow. I love that analogy, like a supercomputer, right? 'Cause I often talk, since I was younger, I often looked at this world almost as if it was a video game. That was the beginning of my
Right.
awakening, was like, oh, I'm leveling up. Like I can see that I'm receiving these initiations or challenges or levels, and they're coming in different shapes and forms through different experiences, different faces. And once I handle them and manage them differently with love, with acceptance, with surrender, with disattachment, then something new comes through, and I'm like, oh, I think I leveled up. So it feels very much like we are computers, and when we die, what I'm hearing you say is like we get a new hard drive, basically. Like our system gets wiped and we come back immediately with a new hard drive. I guess my question coming through is, why do you think, like, I believe we're here to remember and to send love back to source. And I'm still kind of piecing this together. I don't have all
No.
of the answers. We're not meant to. But why do you believe
I
that we're
think it's,
here?
some people, it's actually the most difficult question of what is the purpose of life. And, some people like to say that it's consciousness or God, the Supreme Self, experiencing itself through many different refractions. And I think that's a very good kind of take on it. But I personally think we're here to understand unconditional love, because that's what we really are. When you whittle down all the layers, all that remains is this consciousness. And when you experience the God self, the higher self, the Brahman, through a medicine or through meditation, what you feel is this incredible love that's far superior to any kind of human love or what we know of it. And it's a very humbling and comforting kind of experience and feeling and sensation to have. So I think, the moral of the story, because we're all living these stories, is to learn about love, that we've forgotten about it. And it's become skewed and conditioned. And through that, we've had to go through many trials and tribulations. And this ultimate evolution that our soul's going through is going to bring about a new type of human expression, because it's still, a refraction of source. But we're going to learn to embody more of that love, and for ourselves and for all our brothers and sisters and people that we're connected with in our path.
So this is so beautiful. What I'm hearing is that the whole reward of this game of life is to merge the conditional love that we are, and the doorway to death is the point, the place of love.
Yes, yes. So, having a body is not very easy, living in this duality, being, a spiritual being having a human experience. So I remember when I was expanding a lot and awakening, and I became, very, very connected and aligned, and then burned up pretty much all of my fears. And then there was one fear that remained, and it was to be reborn. And it was like, I want to exit out of this. I want to get out of this samsara wheel of birth and death. And, you know, I was very unattached in that moment. And that was my kind of forefront intention of like, okay, let me figure out how to burn up all my karma so that, I don't have to come back. And then, you go through waves. Then after doing that for a while, then you get scared of it and you're like, hang on, I think I like the human experience. Maybe I want to come back at least once or twice more, just because this is pretty cool, so you kind of sway between them. And then ultimately you realize, hang on, I don't even have any control of that, why am I going to hold myself back from the path and the breadcrumbs that spirit are leaving before me to guide me along my path? That wouldn't make intuitive sense. So then I realized like it's time to let that go, both of it, the fear of both being reborn and the fear of both not being reborn. Because, if we're to believe or subscribe to the true goal is liberation from the human self because of suffering, because there's so much suffering in this realm. If we're to subscribe to that and then start to imagine not being human and what it is to be just consciousness or in direct complete union with God, it starts to get scary to the human mind because you're like, what am I going to be doing? I'm just going to be like floating around in space as God all the time. And all these, stupid concepts and stories come to mind. The truth is you can't imagine it. It's beyond the mind. But if it's really is a goal and, known as the term liberation, you can trust that it's in your highest interest and it's going to be amazing. So the goal is liberation, and the path to liberation is learning love and acceptance.
So death is really liberation, body and mind, which allows us to merge in with that limitless love. And by having almost like near-death experiences or all that, perhaps.
I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you,
it's
babe. Are
cutting
you
out a
able
bit.
to hear
I'm
her,
getting
Paul?
bits and pieces.
Yeah, I'm not able to hear a fluid sentence since you've been on.
I'm not
My
sure.
love.
Okay, if you come closer, it seems to be better.
Better?
You
Yeah.
sound familiar
Yes.
now.
My
Come
mouth
closer.
right up in the screen.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's perfect.
this is much better. Okay, what were you saying? What was your mouth saying?
You've been talking a lot around this idea of surrendering and trusting. And when we go through experience with the medicines, they take us into this place where we have these mini deaths. We have these ego deaths, if you want to call them. And perhaps they are opportunities for us to surrender to what death might feel like and to start to form a new relationship than the traditional one that we have of death coming into the world. And I'm curious, like from your own experience facilitating medicine journeys and your own experience with going on them yourself, like how has the medicine cultivated more of a sense of surrender and shifted your perspective of death?
Great question. Yeah, so, I often tell people surrender is the name of the game, both in medicine work and in the embodied state. So the same type of surrender you learn in ceremony is the same type of surrender you can bring to your life. A lot of us live our daily embodied life in a lot of resistance, but they're unaware of it. It's subconscious or unconscious. From their mind's perspective, they're trying their best, they're doing their best, etc. But what I've learned is that, you're not really in control. People think they have a lot more control than they actually do. When you whittle it all down, you really have two choices, and that is to basically self-love or to self-destroy, which can be, self-sabotage or, filling your cup. There's a lot of different terms for it. So once you choose love for yourself, the path begins. There's two kind of big notions that have to come through your mind for your path to start opening up. And first is, to choose love for yourself. And then from that starting point to be like, I don't know anything. I literally don't know anything. Everything I thought it was or thought I need to let that go right now and just wipe it all clean and start from scratch. Because a lot of people have notions of what they think spirituality is, what they think consciousness is, what they think life is. And, there's a lot of projections that have permeated through the world, through religions, through philosophies that have had concepts kind of stick with us. And what I've learned is that there came a point where I just had to let them all go and accept that I don't know anything. And let that be my new starting point. And what I learned is from that starting point, truth started to become apparent to me. Truth that I already knew, that I already was connected to, but couldn't see when I had these projections or notions in between me and it. So I think, we're approaching a new age right now of, like a psychedelic renaissance. And they've been kind of a bit demonized or, classified in a certain way. But from my understanding from them, they are tools of consciousness. And there's nothing to fear by them. You have to kind of dive headfirst into them. And when you do that, your truth will start to become apparent to you, because all that matters is your truth. No one can tell you the truth, and you can't adopt another person's truth. So through your own experience as consciousness, with consciousness, you have to develop your own understanding of this life.
Yeah, I can see that everyone's consciousness journey is so sacred and so unique. Like I almost see, I see every individual as a
Mm,
drop in the ocean of consciousness and almost
mm,
as an individual neural pathway, right? So my experience will be dramatically different than your experience with mushrooms. How the
mm,
medicine communicates to you, completely different than to me and to you, Elfina. And so, yeah, I'm so grateful that you brought that in. You've really been
yes.
speaking from your own personal experience, because I see oftentimes, specifically in the
Mm,
psychedelic world, like, oh yeah, I had that experience. Like there's kind of like,
mm,
I don't want to say a game or a competition, this like camaraderie of like, oh,
yes.
I experienced that too. Like I almost don't want to experience
Yeah.
what someone else experiences. I really desire my own unique, personalized,
Mm,
textured, colored painting
mm,
sourced from God, like that feels so sacred and so beautiful to me.
yeah.
And so thank you for bringing that up. I think there's something that you said
Mm,
earlier that I'd love to circle back to. You mentioned how collectively sometimes there can be this
mm,
control, this resistance, right? And in that, what was coming through that I'm curious about your take on is, in this life, do you feel with the space of our consciousness that this is a collaborative
mm.
event, the human experience, or do you feel like everything is predestined and decided and we just need to
It's a
surrender and
combination of
strap
both,
in?
in my personal belief. Because of that free
Okay.
will to self-destroy or to self-respect or self-love, to choose love. If you choose the love, then this other path opens up for you. But if you choose the hate or the self-destruction, then you're bringing about an early demise to yourself. If you self-harm through, negative addictions or activities or thinking or energy, you're, you know, bringing about an early demise to yourself and you're kind of missing out on your good ending. I like to put it like you have a good ending and a bad ending, and it's only within your power to choose that. You have an ending either way, but if you choose love and surrender, you're going to live this perfect story that was destined for you. And there is leeway. Spirit is very understanding and forgiving and understands the human experience as it was designed by it. So it understands it well. So it's not extremely harsh. It gives people plenty of chances in their incarnation to choose love. And then there comes a point of no return where suddenly, those opportunities have passed, and now they've locked themselves in to the bad story, which is okay. They're both okay. It's better, obviously, to choose love and to experience as much as you can in this incarnation, to do as much work and clearing as you possibly can. But everyone's always trying their best. If they knew better, they would do better. So I just encourage everyone to just explore the self, so that you can make the best decisions for yourself. Because a lot of the medicines and ceremonies and things like that are romanticized about visuals, about awakening, about, all these kind of concepts. But truly, the intention should be, I want to know what I am. And I want to know what I'm doing here. And outside of that, everything else is kind of folly. So if you set that as your goal, that's what kind of happened to me. I met a wall in my life, and I was like, wow, like nothing really interests me anymore. So that common understanding and experience of like depression or apathy or disconnection was very prevalent within me. But because I'd had a lot of experiences within the matrix, within the societal constructs of what makes you happy, I'd already kind of run through all of those, and there was like nothing left. So it was like, well, now what do I do? And that's when I was guided to find my truth, or part of my truth at that time, through the medium of ceremony and medicine. So that was really my intention. Like, I want to understand what it is to die so I can know what it is to live. And I also want to know what I am. What is this game, and why am I here? And that was the cornerstone, or the ground floor of where I was at, to start kind of growing the lotus of consciousness through me, because there was nothing else that interested me.
And for those people who might be watching this video who have a lot of curiosities around different plant medicines, but fears that are holding them back, or it just hasn't been the right timing, or they have questions, what may your advice be to these people in approaching plant medicines, and how plant medicines have helped you personally to reconcile with your truth?
So my advice would be, to first and foremost, draw from your own experience with them. If you haven't experienced them, go and experience them. Don't draw from other people's experiences, because I've seen so many different processes now of people, and the process that someone will go through is as unique as their soul. So they should, disregard anyone else's experience. Like, some people share their experience from the ego, and some people will share their experience from the heart. So when someone's sharing from the heart, there's usually some kind of like anecdotal structural story, like a moral of like, this is how I went to medicine. I was an addict or something, and I didn't know where it was coming from, and then the medicine addressed the trauma in me. So there wasn't any more match. Once the trauma had been addressed or released through the medicine, there wasn't a match to the same behaviors that were holding me back in my consciousness. So those are good experiences. And, rather than the nitty gritty of like what happened, I saw a phoenix, or, I saw Shiva or Ganesha or any of these kind of things, more like, what's the kind of cause and effect from the medicine? Those are good experiences to draw from, but not from a mirrored place of like, I want that. I want to see Ganesha too, or I want to experience what you experience. That's fine to want it, to want to experience the liberation or the letting go or the shedding of something that wasn't serving. That's a healthy intention or desire, and that's fine. Secondly, I would try and trust intuition in who you end up doing these ceremonies with. A lot of people have good intention in offering ceremony and working with these sacred medicines, but they haven't done their work fully themselves yet, and they might be offering them too quick, or be offering them for financial or spiritual ego purposes. So I'd just be conscious of who you receive medicines from. Always reach out and don't be afraid to ask questions. And, if you can, see them and trust what you feel rather than what you see, but what you feel about the person and their experience level and things like that. And then personally, the final question, how have medicines helped me? They've helped me a lot. It's been about 10 years since first experiencing it. I was always I remember being a young boy and somehow feeling like believing in God. Like it came to me very, very early, very naturally. But I always believed God was outside of me. That, he was somewhere beyond the universe or somewhere up there. So for me, my path actually started with yoga and breath work. And that took me to a Kundalini awakening where I was experiencing similar experiences that you can experience through medicinal ceremonies. And then, it was then that I was like, I set my intention of like, I'm going to find God. And back then he was still out, traveled a lot and went to see different, masters in yoga or breath work or whatever modality I thought that I would find it through. I would seek through that. And then came medicine, which was the beginning experience of finding the God self within. And it took some time, even when first experiencing ayahuasca, for instance, in its full magnificence, I still came back to my embodied state and still struggled to make the changes that I knew I could or wanted to that would better serve me in my life. So it was a gradual process. But after ayahuasca, this concept came to me of like, oh, they're not anything to fear. They're technologies of consciousness. So you need to experience all of them if you want to have the full understanding of consciousness, kind of like a pizza slice. And each one will bring you one perspective and slice of that teaching that it brings to consciousness. So I started going through them all one by one, and they all brought me such magnificent experiences on it and also after it. But it was really Bufo that really was the main catalyst in my life for truly understanding who I am, what I am. But they're all as important to each other. But if there is, the advice I would give to people is if you haven't experienced any plant medicine of any kind, often people start with psilocybin or ayahuasca. And I would say, although, psilocybin is a good entry medicine, for some it's not, because seeing things is scary and they still have a lot of false beliefs and false concepts of how they would construe what they see. So I would suggest people start with Bufo. Bufo is, not a very visual medicine, but an energetic medicine that brings about a total ego death. It's probably the most effective and prolific medicine for bringing about an ego death, which once that ego and mind are taken out of it, you kind of, what's left is what you really are. So it's that immediate perspective of like, oh, wow, so this is what I am. And what comes with that also is this ejection of trauma. And what I've discovered is most people are self-destroying or choosing that negative path and negative outcome for themselves because of trauma. And if they can address the trauma, then it's so much easier to not choose that path. It's almost intuitive. You're just being more drawn to self-nourishing, self-loving, and surrendering, and all the good virtues that we need to adopt. And whereas when the trauma's there, it's really unconscious of this, like being drawn into like, I don't care about life, I don't care about myself, I'm gonna smoke this cigarette, or I'm gonna, drink this alcohol, and it doesn't matter, I don't care. It's so much easier to make the wrong choice. But what you'll find, and when I work with people, and I've seen many people go through it now, is that once the trauma is ejected, the desire or attachment to make those choices is completely nullified, if not extremely diminished.
Mm. I have so many questions and things that I want to ask, but this idea of what happens once we die and before too.
Come closer.
Come closer.
I have so many questions that I want to ask Paul because we could talk for hours and hours. But something that was coming through this conversation that you mentioned was like this idea of, for those of us especially that grew up with religion and Christianity, and what do you think of this idea of there being a heaven or being a hell? And you did mention earlier that there's a point where the soul has not chosen love, and then it's kind of like too late in a sense. And I was just curious to hear you expand on that, and if that's how you perceive hell, and I guess what you think about those concepts and those words.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's a great question. So I personally believe that, heaven and hell are contained within your consciousness. And there's a version of it that plays out on earth. We're here, we're in heaven and hell at the same time. And then contained within our consciousness, we also have heaven and hell within us. So when you go inside, you can journey deep down into the dark side, the shadow self of your consciousness, which is essential and very rewarding work, but can be very scary when you're not ready for it. Medicines are intuitive. They know when you're ready. They know when you're ready. So I think, we're living in hell when we're sick, when we're suffering, when we're feeling suicidal, we're feeling depressed, we're feeling lost, we're experiencing a form of hell. When, deep pain and suffering has come upon us due to karma or decisions, we're experiencing hell, like, being severely burned, for instance, in your physical body, and, having like 80 or 90% of your body totally burned, and now you're in a burns unit, like, recovering. You're experiencing hell, in your own form, and it's brutal. And, we just got to have so much compassion for people that are going through it, but we've all been through it. When I look at other people, I just see where they're at. And I used to be very like connected to empathy and see people suffering and then like connect to it. And it would cause me a lot of suffering myself. And I was connecting to suffering that wasn't mine. And, part of it was like this pity, part of it was like compassion, part of it was like love and wanting to help. But another part of it was fear. Because when you look at someone who's a little less fortunate than you or going through some suffering, you're on an unconscious and subconscious level imagining it was you and what the experience is. And your fear kicks in at that moment. So it's not really coming from the right place. So we all have to kind of upgrade our empathy to compassion. And the big difference between those two is, with empathy, you're connecting to that suffering or that energy, and you're coming down to it and imagining it, imagining yourself in it, and feeling sorry for this person. And through that, it becomes this like collective negative energetic experience. But with compassion, the same love is there, the same care, but I'm not coming down to it. I'm recognizing the separation in it, that it's not my suffering, and that by me imagining I'm you going through that suffering, I'm not really helping you. But if I just stay here in my space of love, and compassion for you, sending you, the best wishes, strength, wisdom, whatever I can to help you endure what you're going through, then that's probably the best I can do for you, like on a mind level. Outside of that, yes, there's physical things we can do for people sometimes who are going through suffering, but there's a lot of people going through suffering and we can't help them all. So focus on helping them energetically. So back to your main question. So, and then when we're on the flip side of that, when we're experiencing moments of levity, alignment, connection, luck, all of these things that make us feel really good about our life right now or the near future, we're in a form of heaven. When we're expanding and downloads or understandings or consciousness is blooming within us, we're in a form of heaven. So as the Hermetic principle goes, as above, so below. So heaven and hell is here, but it's also not here. It's the same. So there are higher dimensions outside of the human body that can be expressed as heaven or hell, but they're just mirrors that come from the inside out.
Paul,
I'm
can you
planning
write a
to,
book?
yeah.
So
Yes.
we are gods. We are the hell. The hell is in us. We're none of it. It's above us. It's below us. It's in us.
Correct. You're everything. There's
Yes.
nothing outside of you. There's literally nothing.
I had this download yesterday because obviously, I mean, it's so interesting talking about death has also brought up the conversation of life, the duality. And we carry DMT within our brain. It's the chemical of both birth and the concept of death. So like we are death in a way. Like we are life, we are death walking in the flesh. And I really felt that yesterday, just not even in the sense of my physical body dying, but being the catalyst for other people to look at an old story, narrative, or pattern through, poking or provoking something, or just, through my mere essence of being and having like that element in them die. I was like, wow, I really like was connecting to this sense of death within me, and it was so interesting. And I was wondering what your what your thoughts
I
are
mean,
around that.
we are life and we are death. And, it's been stated that when we're born, 5-MeO-DMT is released from our pineal gland, and also when we die. And if you experience a medicine like Bufo, which has 5-MeO-DMT, you're more likely to believe it, because as you go through these rebirths that the medicine can facilitate for people that are ready, it's when you come out of it, it's literally like, wow, like I died, but I'm back. And I didn't have to actually die. Like, this is pretty cool. So maybe this is a way to kind of like, speed up, this birth-death cycle. So you really are, like you said, you're just everything. You never know your time, right? But you can bring about an earlier time by destroying yourself. And then, by choosing the right path, you can, actually make it to the time that you were really, supposed to die. So the best thing we can do is, just basically take a step back in all of our lives, all of these attachments and desires and things that we've held on to. We should just throw them all away and just stop. And in that stopping, just be like, I'm going to start again. I'm going to choose love. I'm going to choose health. Because how can you even house consciousness or an expanded consciousness within your shell if it's not healthy? So everyone's at a different starting point. But one thing I learned is that the more healthy your shell and your body are, the more consciousness you can house, the more light you can hold. So everyone's first priority should be not from a place of vanity, but from a place of understanding to start really taking their health seriously. And the cornerstones of that are basically, what you put in you. You are what you eat. So if we eat a lot of processed foods, sugars, meats, dairies, things that are acidic, or have been, proven through so-called science or understood intuitively, we should not be continuing the cycle of putting those things in our body. And we should also take exercise very seriously. As we are energetic beings having this physical existence within matter. But if you can imagine like a lake or a pond, if it becomes stagnant, what happens? The water turns green, like moss and fungus and all different types of, things that, that aren't really healthy become stagnant. And it's the same in the body. We're made of a lot of water. So when the body becomes stagnant, the energy doesn't move. So it becomes another breeding ground for disease. So, taking diet seriously, taking exercise seriously. If you can sweat once a day, great. Whether it's yoga or going to the gym, taking a run, doing skateboarding, surfing, whatever it is for that person. But if they can just prioritize that importance of moving the body, fighting against gravity. They often say, like, as people are aging, in regards to muscle tone or muscle mass, of like, use it or lose it. And I subscribe to that because I feel like we have gravity constantly working against us. And if we're not like fighting back against gravity by pushing the body, moving it, doing push-ups, pull-ups, or whatever it may be, we start to again just wither and become weak. And then it's like a snowball effect, You start looking back and be like, a couple of years ago I was much stronger and much more flexible. Oh, it's too late now, forget it. And the snowball just keeps going, but it's never too late. Stop, take a step back, use your intuition, your intellect, your understanding, your experience to take a giant leap forward. It's never too late. And you can, bring about a much more beautiful, healthy existence. It does take a bit of time, so it's not going to happen overnight. You didn't destroy yourself overnight, so it's going to take a bit of time to also come into fruition, but not that long. If you can commit to a solid path of healthy diet, exercise, and even plant medicine, if you need that assistance, over a couple of months, you'll be surprised at how you feel.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, I hear the importance of taking care of this shell, right? That's Holy Spirit, and how that connects to everything. Mind, body, and spirit are all interconnected. I want to ask one question that came up, and then we did have an audience question as well too, and then we're going to wrap up. But wow, my this is such an incredible conversation, and like Elfina said, I feel like I could talk to you for days about this stuff, and just so beautiful and grounding to have a conversation with you. But you mentioned meat being quite acidic. What are your thoughts on meat eating? And do you believe that, like, ultimately from the highest point of consciousness, that we're not meant to be eating the flesh of another animal?
I mean, I'll kind of break that down into two kind of questions of like the meat nowadays. When we look at the ancients, when we were hunter-gatherers, and before the world was so impurified through, environmentally, then like, I'm sure it was very different catching a deer or killing a wild boar, and, as a tribe or a family, going through the process of, sacrificially, killing this animal, thanking it, and then eating it for the resources and for survival of the tribe. But nowadays we have a choice. So firstly, we have that choice. Secondly, I really feel like a lot of the meat that people are eating has been compromised. We're hearing now of like, chickens that are coming into maturity in 3 to 4 weeks, which is unheard of. And some people believe these are like, genetically modified or something. And, at the very least, they're living in these inhumane conditions and eating God knows what, and being pumped with hormones and steroids and antibiotics. So when we're eating that, aren't we also eating that suffering? Because, when an animal's killed and they know they're about to be killed, they seize up, and then the meat becomes tough. So it's like not as valuable to sell or to put into the market. So they like to try and, when possible, not let them know that they're about to be slaughtered. But when they do, all this like hormones and adrenaline and all this stuff shocks to the meat because they know they're about to die. So wouldn't it be the same true of what was, on a compound level, chemical level, what these animals are carrying, we're also eating. So when they're pumping them full of hormones and antibiotics, there's also, studies or things like that say that, meat takes more energy to digest than it provides. So, as it goes through your system, we should eat for energy, right? That's the point of it, not for taste. If we start eating for taste, we start going down a different road, one that's not in our highest alignment. So I would say that personally, and this is just personally, I choose to not eat meat. I started as a vegan about close to 10 years ago, and I did that for a few years solid. And then, because I wasn't doing it properly, when you talk about veganism, it's a diet of exclusion. Like, you can't have this, you can't have that, you can't have meat, you can't have dairy. You can have Coca-Cola, and you can have Snickers, and you can have Skittles, and all these things, which, that's not healthy. So I started to, because I wasn't doing it right, I started being like, oh, maybe I need fish. So I brought fish back in. And then for a while I was eating fish, and then I was like, you know what, they're a more primitive life form. They don't go through as much. Maybe it's not as bad. So, I kind of went back to that. And then nowadays I don't eat any flesh. I have really come to the understanding within myself of, I just don't want to eat flesh because I don't have to. I feel like a lot of the science on protein, on vitamins, on minerals is not quite true. So I've done my own research and I'm doing my own experimentation with my own body. So I personally believe we don't need to eat that much. I think if you eat 3 meals a day, it slows you down. I like to eat once a day, twice maximum if I'm doing a lot of stuff. Usually I eat once, and I like to eat fruits, raw vegetables, and nuts. And that's about it.
Beautiful. Thank you for answering. That definitely gives me a lot to work with. It's been coming up a lot, and it just
You're
came
welcome.
up again. So thank you for answering that. So we have a little bit of time left, and I feel like the question that was posed by the audience, by our dear friend Tori, be a beautiful way to kind of wrap up everything. So in about a minute or two, she asked, "How do you eject the trauma? How do you address the trauma?" And I feel like you've answered this in many ways, but I'd love to hear.
Everyone is holding on to different trauma. Firstly, you have to be ready to face your trauma, whatever it is. Now, a lot of it's unknown because it's coming from former selves. I like to break it down at this point that we come with, 3 traumas, 3 layers of trauma in our current embodied existence. And the first level is the soul level. So the soul is carrying trauma from all of the incarnations that it's had, all of the lives, the experiences, the decisions, the suffering, the pain, and ultimately the deaths. That's carried like an imprint within the soul. So ejecting soul trauma is different from ejecting ancestral trauma. That's the second level. We come with ancestral. So what this body that we've incarnated into, it dates back, to the beginning of time at some point, if you can trace it back far enough. But more recently, the trauma of our ancestral and our ancestors, our recent ancestors, we are carrying within our DNA. So you also have to embody and acknowledge and then eject this trauma. And then we have probably the most simple trauma, which is the trauma of this current life that we're living, which is usually mostly come from childhood and adolescence. As we're children, we're very sensitive, so even sometimes being told no or refused or being slapped or hit or disciplined can really inject these physical traumas that get stored in the body. And then they go through time, they pass out of memory and they get stored within the body and they become unconscious. But they definitely start to dictate the decisions we make. So when it comes to these 3 layers of trauma, I suggest, taking, there is plant medicine that can help with it, and there's also ancient techniques that help with it. So some people are open to plant medicine, some people aren't. But Spirit's so wise and gracious. There is more than one way to skin a cat, as they say. You can achieve the goal of liberation through many different ways. There's more than one path. So for those that aren't on the medicine path or open to it, I would suggest, things like yoga, Kundalini yoga, breath work, and, any spiritual modalities like Tai Chi or Qigong, anything that starts to get you in the body and starts to move the energy, it's going to start to bring about higher awareness. And it's as the consciousness raises and the awareness raises that these things come up. Just like with medicine work, people come and they do a ceremony and the next day they might feel amazing. The next day they might not. It's really honoring where they're at. Sometimes the trauma seeps out over many weeks. Sometimes it's just ejected in a day. But I would say that, if you're taking the path of medicine, and it kind of goes both ways, even for the non-medicinal path, it's like, don't stop. Once you start, keep going. Keep going until you get to the other side. It's kind of like a tunnel. And for some people, the tunnel is very pronounced, that they tried some medicine work, maybe it was the wrong time, maybe it was the wrong practitioner, maybe they weren't ready to go all in. So if you're going that path, whichever, just go all in and keep going until you get to the other side. Because getting stuck in the tunnel is worse sometimes than, continuing. It's that freezing. You're like freeze and you're like, oh, I'm scared. I don't want to go any further. But it's the bravest ones that can heal because they don't let any fear get in the way. They remember, they keep in the forefront of their mind that they have to die one day. So the sooner they can awaken or raise their awareness, the more days they're going to have left to enjoy in a higher consciousness, potentially trauma-free. And sometimes it's not as simple because medicines aren't magic pills, that it's like, I'm going to take a medicine and it's going to inject my trauma. Sometimes Spirit wants you to look at your own errors of your ways and, make those adjustments. And sometimes you have to start and, really take a good hard look at yourself without, judgment, without ego, without, rose-tinted glasses. And, and it's at that point that, Spirit will deem it time for it to come out. For me, in my own personal journey, I lost my mother when I was about 19, and she was sick for many years before it. And it kept going through this wave of like, she's going to get better, she's going to live. And no, she's going to die. Oh, she's going to get better, she's going to live. So after that kind of happened over a few years, because she was only given 6 months to live, but she lived 6 years, we started like to lose belief that she'd die. And then all of a sudden she died suddenly. And it was this massive trauma upon myself, upon my family. And, at that time, it took me about 6 months to emotionally process it. And then I kind of started to move on from it, put the pieces back together in my life, and went about my journey. But as many years went by, if you'd asked me whether I thought that it was dealt with, I would have said yes, because I could talk to you about it without any emotional, physiological reaction within my body happening. So I would say yes. But then when my deep work with Bufo came about, to my absolute surprise, there was this absolute volcano waiting to come out with the energy of this trauma. The emotion had been addressed, but the energy hadn't. And it was buried deep, so deep, that I needed the assistance of a medium like a medicine like Bufo in order to trigger this explosion and the right person to hold space for it. So I felt safe enough for it to come out, because it takes a lot of trust in someone to take you to that level, to take you to that space, because it's buried so deep. You have to have a lot of faith and a lot of belief and a lot of determination and a lot of courage. And then on the other side of it, you realize, wow, thank you. Like I needed that. So it's different for everyone. Part of my work is guiding people to that place where they're ready to release that. And, you know, the more people I serve, the more I understand about it. So I would say there's many ways to release trauma, but if there was one way, it's to be ready to release it. So to make that conscious decision of I'm going to release my trauma is probably more powerful than all of the aforementioned. It's the seed that will sprout into the, you know, the fulfillment of that intention.
Yes, beautiful. It's the conscious decision, the conscious commitment to walk through that tunnel, no matter what. And sometimes walking through that tunnel is easier when we have somebody holding a light next to us, like, um, a medicine man like yourself. And I just want to wrap this up. We only have a couple minutes left, but from my own experience with Paul, and I know Heather has had her own experiences with Paul too, just highly recommend. I felt so supported and so safe, and it was just I had such a heart clearing, a heart opening, a heart dissolving experience that has had rippling effects truly since I was in the room. So for
Yes.
anyone watching who would like out and would like to reach out, you can connect to Paul directly here through his Instagram. And myself or Society, and we have a whole private community where we explore topics like this through WhatsApp that we would love to add you to as well. Thank you again, Paul, for
You're
your
welcome.
time, for your experience, for your wisdom. Maybe we'll have a round two because I feel like there's just so much more that we could talk about.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for
Yes.
the opportunity to explain these things, and I had a beautiful time talking with you. I really appreciate both of your energy and your commitment and what you're trying to do and your movement. May Spirit bless you infinitely. Thank you.
And same
Love
to
you
you.
too.
Love you both so much.
Yeah.
Time and energy, and absolutely round two on the way. Keep your eyes peeled for that. And thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for
everyone. Bye
joining
bye.
us today.